I want this to be a no fluff review, going over the key points of the race so you know exactly what happened, and given how relatively boring the Bahrain Grand Prix was, this shouldn't take too long. Starting with the race winner, Red Bull and Max Verstappen. He was in a league of his own, and while that phrase is used a lot, I really mean it. He was 11.9 seconds ahead of his own teammate Sergio Perez in the other Red Bull, which is a little bit embarrassing for Sergio, but he was a whopping 38 seconds ahead of the nearest non-Red Bull car, which was Fernando Alonso in third. Early on in the race, Max's engineer, Gianpiero Lambassi, said to Max, "We're not in a race, we need you to slow down." Now Max was reluctant to do it, but he did in the end. Such was their dominance early on. Without any pace management, the Red Bull was easily a second a lap faster than any other team. So let's hope that doesn't continue all season, or we're in for a boring season. Fernando Alonso was the only shining light in the race, the standout performer, and he gave us a lot of exciting moves. He started 5th but dropped back behind both Mercedes at the start, with Lewis Hamilton getting him at turn 4. He also survived contact with his teammate at that very same corner after Lance Stroll came steaming in and clipped his rear wheel. He managed to get back past Russell fairly early on, and then later in the race he had a lovely fight with Lewis Hamilton, ultimately getting past him fairly easily and pulling away, before then dispatching Carlos Sainz for that podium position. It was honestly a great watch, seeing Fernando Alonso so comfortable in the car, and it was a very deserved podium. Both Mercedes cars struggled for outright pace, and Lewis came home in 5th, which he said was all he could really do. George Russell got passed by Lance Stroll and never really looked like getting back past him, so he came home 7th. So, Ferrari. It was another calamity. Carlos Sainz was in no man's land really behind Charles Leclerc, but Charles jumped Perez at the start and was running in 2nd place. He dropped behind the Mexican halfway or so into the race, but that was the least of his issues. On lap 41, Leclerc retired from the race, and that has much bigger consequences than this one race alone. Before the race even began, Leclerc had changed one of his engine components, the energy storage. He of course didn't change it himself, he's got mechanics for that, but it was changed when the team saw some issues on the data. Well, it turns out the replacement energy store that they put in the car was also one of the parts that failed during the race. Now this is a really big issue because it means there's obviously a bigger issue at play causing this battery storage to fail. Not only that, you're only allowed 2 of these parts during the season before you get a penalty, and Charles has now used both. Not ideal, but some would say classic Ferrari. McLaren had an absolute nightmare of a race. Oscar Piastri retired fairly early on, and Lando was nursing an engine issue that meant he had to sightsee through the pits about 7 times to get air topped up. It wasn't great for him, and he finished last of the running cars. They can take some positives though. When Sainz and Hamilton were battling towards the end of the race, Lando was behind them on track, albeit a lap down, but he was keeping pace with them, looking faster at times. If they can get on top of their gremlins, it could be a really good race car. I now just want to give a shout out to some standout drivers during the race. First of all, Lance Stroll. Stroll finished 6th in the end in a car that was clearly capable of podiums, but considering he fractured both wrists, had a pin put in one of them, broke his toe, and can barely climb in and out of the car, I'm sure you'll agree that 6th place is a pretty good result. Fair play to him for his resilience to get in the car and put in a great performance. Valtteri Bottas started the race in 14th place, but after the first stops he had somehow jumped Fernando Alonso and Russell and got himself up to 6th place. He stopped early and took full advantage of the tyres. He was overtaken fairly quickly by both cars, but he would end up finishing the race in 8th place, which was a fantastic result for the Alpha team. There is one driver that would outdo him though for positions gained: Pierre Gasly. It was a terrible start to the Bahrain weekend for Alpine after both drivers had a poor qualifying by their standards. Gasly had his lap deleted for track limits, so ended up starting last. He went on to make up 11 positions during the race though to finish 9th place. An epic comeback that deserves a lot of plaudits. The same can't be said of Esteban Ocon though, who definitely had a weekend to forget. He started the race in P9, so good points were a real possibility. Sadly, he received a 5-second time penalty for a grid infringement. It turns out he was too far ahead in his pit box at the start of the race. When Ocon made his first pit stop, the mechanics waited for the allotted time before starting work. Sadly, they got it wrong by 0.4 seconds and started to work too soon. Because of this, he was handed another penalty for not serving the first one correctly. This was harsher. 10 seconds. Oh, that's terrible, you say. It can't get any worse than that. But it did. It turns out, in his trip through the pits, he was speeding by 0.1 kilometers an hour. Ouch. He was then given another 5-second penalty. He eventually retired from the race, and I would have done too. Poor Esteban. Alexander Albon would lock out the top 10, scoring points for Williams in the first race of the season, which will be a huge boost for the team. And Logan Sargent had a really solid first race as well, ending up in 13th ahead of Nick de Vries in the AlphaTauri and both Haskars, which I'm sure he will be pleased with. That's your Bahrain Grand Prix breakdown with all the key points. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. It does really help. Also, check out some of these other videos. Until next time.